in terms of the online chapters, as I mentioned earlier, there are 5 of them there, and they cover some of the material which was in the first few chapters of the version 5, with the addition of the overviews chapter, and they really will be covering the sort of like the Cochrane specific advice, the Cochrane specific methods and editorial expectations, etc. The overviews chapters worth a look at. And what it really does is identify the sort of like the specific characteristics which define a Cochrane overview of reviews, and that's just not any old overview of reviews. There's just specific expectations for Cochrane overviews of reviews around them being specific. You know, they're sufficiently up to date, homogeneous in terms of PICO, homogeneous in terms of what and how outcome data are presented in terms of the included reviews, and sufficiently low risk of bias and high methodological quality. So that chapter really does give quite a lot of detailed guidance and methods for conducting an overview of reviews, and also when an overview of reviews, or a Cochrane overview of reviews rather, is needed and when it's appropriate. So there have been a few questions about sort of what next. So hopefully this will answer some of those questions. The book itself, all the chapters are sitting there in the final folder, which is a wonderful sight to see. They'll be going to Wiley this week, and they will also be going up onto the website later this week as well. So those of you who want to go and have a look at them, then please do. Hopefully this webinar's made you want to go and read further about some of the issues we've raised here. What will happen next is we will get the proofs and the copy edits from Wiley, which we'll need to address. And we will then also create a browsable version, which will be open and like version 5 is at the moment. The book in hard copy will be published later this year. We don't have a date yet, but it will be this year. And then there are we've seen some questions around sort of implementation. So very much there's some advice there which we think is ready to go. So, you know, some of the advice we've talked about, why wouldn't you do it? It's some great new advice in the book there. In terms of specific tools, consult with and check with particular Cochrane review groups, and there are some methods which will need to be implemented in RevMen Web, so there may be some constraints there. So there's new material that is ready for use, and so we really look forward to seeing what you make of it. So it remains for me just to say thank you very much, especially to everybody who's contributed to this. It's been a cast of potentially certainly hundreds, I don't know about thousands, but there's a lot of people who've written some wonderful chapters for this book. Thank you very much to the team at Cochrane as well for supporting it through. And thanks also to all of you who have participated in the webinar. So I think now we've got a few minutes left, and so we're going to look down some of these questions. I've been talking, so I've not looked at the questions recently, so maybe I'll hand to Julian for a sec while I have a look at them.
Yes, so well, some quick ones that I've noted. Network meta-analysis cannot at the moment be done in RevMan. I don't expect it to be for the foreseeable future, although excitingly the new RevMan of the future will have a different data structure that will be compatible with network meta-analysis. So for example, it'll hard code more than 2 treatment arms for a study in a way that allows us to interface very easily with network meta-analysis software and to import the results in as tables or pictures. There was a couple of specific questions on the risk of bias tool. Someone is missing the other bias domain. We're very clear that we don't think there should be another bias domain in the new tool, because all of the biases that we can think of are covered by the domains. There are other issues. A specific issue raised was industry sponsorship of a study. That's not a bias in itself. it may lead to biases, and those biases are covered by the tool. It may alternatively lead to ways in which the study was designed that may prejudice its result, but it would still get an unbiased result if done properly. So conflicts of interest don't necessarily lead to bias in results if you understand what questions have been asked. So it does not belong in a tool like this, but it should influence judgments in certain places. And there's a question about baseline differences. I completely agree with someone pointing out that we must not look for chance differences in baseline variables in trials as an indicator of bias. That's absolutely wrong. And there is a question in the tool about baseline differences, but it is not asking whether there are baseline differences. It's asking whether there are baseline differences that are so severe that they indicate the randomization didn't work. And we're very clear that we're not looking for chance compatible imbalances. Maybe that was a bit specific. I'm just looking through the more questions. A couple of people asking about non-randomized trials and observational studies. We have a whole chapter dedicated to non-randomized studies, which includes observational studies of interventions. We have that in the current version, so I would invite people to look at that until tomorrow, and the new one when the new one's up online. James, have you spotted any others?
I've been typing away to answer some of the questions. So the more specific ones.
So Julian, if I can, I've identified a couple which might be relevant for everyone. So, for example, when will version 6 will be required to follow? I'm currently conducting a Cochrane review using version 5 and plan to submit for peer review later this month.
This is a difficult one. The implementation of all these methods is a multifaceted decision problem. Unfortunately, we can't just organize things that one day we're in the old one and the next day we're in the new one, because the new one, well, some of the new issues raised in the new handbook will become much easier to implement once there is training and once there is software. We have to start somewhere, and our starting point is to produce the documentation, which is the handbook. A number of these things are subject to implementation plans, which will happen over the course of the next few months. So we're not saying this is now the handbook everyone should follow. I see this as early view of the material that will at some point become the formal guidance. So there'll be a transition period where some bits will be easy to implement and just updated. Some bits will be dependent on the tools becoming available and the support and the knowledge of review groups able to support review authors through the tasks. And different review groups will come on board with different parts of the new guidance at different points in time. So I think that the advice is if you're a review author, talk to your review group and obtain their advice on which parts of the handbook they are happy to entertain. And I think, unfortunately, for a transition period, different review groups will have different answers to that question. And I'm happy with that because there are some big jumps, for example, going to risk of bias 2 and review groups supporting people fully to do network meta-analyses. Some would be able to do that much sooner than others.
Okay, another question I'd like you to answer is, will an online version be made available for non-Cochrane people, or will we have to wait for the hard copy to be published? So the issue of access to new handbook.
Yeah, we will have a completely open, full handbook, and the plan for that is to, because it's quite a lot of work to create it, we're going to wait until we've got the copy-edited version of the handbook so that that can be entirely identical to the book version. That will be, I predict, around 3 or 4 months away, but it will be fully open, browsable in the sort of format that most of the Cochrane website, cochrane.org, is set up.
Another question I think is very interesting in terms of training materials and how soon this new methodology advice will be implemented in the training materials provided to Cochrane trainers, and I think that's part of the implementation plans for each individual method. Is that right?
It is indeed. So, I mean, for example, for network meta-analysis, there are already a lot of training materials around that the Cochrane Comparing Multiple Interventions Methods Groups has produced. That's freely available online. I can't remember if it's closely integrated into Cochrane training, but I would hope that it could be. We are in the process of finalizing, I mean, with Dario and Chris on some online learning for network meta-analysis. The online interactive learning for risk of bias was written some years ago in order to be compatible with risk of bias 2, so that shouldn't need much updating. But yeah, we are embarking on discussions with Cochrane training, I think would be the thing to say, to make sure that some of these key new methods or new bits of thinking are integrated into the slide stats.
Yes, and just to add that it's not only about training materials, but also about the software support, like Redman Web. So I guess these are all developments that we'll have to kind of push in parallel. I think there are quite a lot of questions, and many of them are related to specific aspects of methods or methodologies or developments in the methodologies as you've described in presentation. I'm aware also of the time, and I think that we should probably perhaps focus on one or two questions more on which are relevant for handbook as a whole. And I'm sure that there will be other future opportunities to discuss specific methodologies in detail. I think interesting question is about the relation between Messier standards and handbook. So has the new handbook requirements been integrated into the Messier standards yet? Or perhaps vice versa, how Messier is reflected in handbook?
Well, it's gone in both directions. We have integrated all Messier into the handbook so that where they weren't explicitly stated within the guidance, they now are. And through writing the guidance, we have redrafted or tweaked some of the standards. We haven't released that. It's a very minor update. A lot of it's just minor wording. And so there's not a great, there won't be a major new release of Messier. It's really a case of harmonizing Messier in the handbook.